This is talk about a highlight that is taken from mission 8, quality of security, and just one cutout from one of the projects. Let me first try to get us all on the same page, just with 2 introductory slides, what the mission is about. We try to look at complex software systems, and despite all the efforts to make software more secure, we know that complex software systems contain many vulnerabilities today. So there's no question about whether a piece of software is secure or not at this complexity level, but the question can be, how secure is it? And these systems get more and more life critical in many cases. So that's an important question to ask. And of course, we have common criteria, we have different protection profiles and all that, but they put more of an emphasis on controlling the process of software construction. In the end, you still don't now know this software system, how secure is it? And that's actually part to which we want to contribute in this mission. Why? Of course, I don't have to preach to the choir. Measuring the degree of security that we find in a complex software system is important in many ways, if and only if we measure the right things, of course. For us, the ultimate goal is to give the security economy a push with that, because obviously if a software vendor can tell that their software system is more secure than a competitor's, then they can hope to be able to demand a higher price. So that could push economy, legislation could benefit from that, and so on. So this is the ultimate goal. And we have only 4 projects in this rather confined mission. The first one looks at the formal side in the life cycle during construction. When we have security properties, the question is, how do they compare? How do they behave under composition? So that's one issue. A second project looks at complex, especially IoT ecosystems, and tries to make, quote unquote, the hacking process for finding vulnerabilities more systematic and more comparable, so that during such processes can get a better handle on understanding how secure such a complete and complex ecosystem really is. Think of, for instance, Apple's ecosystem for Apple Watch and iPhones, etc. P3 looks at the problem from a data-driven perspective. Here we try to collect as much data as we can about that software system, like, for instance, the security, the behavior in terms of found vulnerabilities over time, and this is going to be a topic today. And finally, P4 looks at our ultimate goal, asking if and how much such a discriminator like a security assessment quality of security measure could actually influence the decision making, for instance, of companies that are faced with buying complex software systems. Okay. Today, as I said, we'll pick out one issue from one project. Namely, in this talk, we look at the question, is software security increasing over time? If this was the case, if you could really say that the security matures in a way, then of course that could give us a handle to measuring the level of security. Especially, we are looking at the rate of vulnerabilities detected and mitigated. And if this rate declined, this could be a sign that the software is getting more mature. And then we have mathematical and statistical methods like Bayesian methods that we apply in many fields that could help us to derive numeric values even from that. However, this issue was addressed more than 15 years ago already, and the observations are contradicting. One pretty well-known publication came to the conclusion that the rate of found vulnerabilities is not decreasing, which sounds astonishing because if you pick out and take out the vulnerabilities from a piece of software, so the rate should decrease over time. And indeed, a second publication found that. However, this contradiction led to a lot of discussion, of course, and we found that 15 years later now, it's really time to look at the issue again from a data-driven perspective. For that, it is important to know that during these 15 years, one important discussion was emphasizing the biases that may have led to these contradicting results. And let me just pick the last one, effort bias. Obviously, we could observe a decreasing rate of vulnerabilities discovered if fewer and fewer people would be looking at vulnerabilities in a complex piece of software. And of course, therefore, it's important to come up with a new approach that limits this bias or these different kinds of bias to a maximum. And that's what we did and has just recently led to the acceptance of a publication at ATHENE TOPS. And Nikos, who should be credited for having carried out most of the work, is also with us in this talk. We concentrated on the Debian distribution of Linux for a number of reasons that I'll explain in a second. And we concentrated on the duration of the stable release, again, for reasons that helped us to limit the bias in our data. And finally, we associated this also with information and data we derived from a bug bounty program. And the reason for that will become clear also in a moment. Why did we choose Debian? First of all, it's one of the biggest and most popular collections. And of course, we get access to lots of data because it's free and open software, and it limits the vendor bias. There's no vendor who would try to hide some vulnerabilities or some information from the public. So that's one reason. And if you have lots of data, then you can test for a couple of biases more easily. In addition, I said that we concentrated on the stable releases because after the stable release, there's a quite strict policy in Debian to adopt only critical patches. Because, of course, one of the biases could be that patches of all kinds could introduce new vulnerabilities over time, and that would make it very hard to, distinguish different effects. Here we can say critical patches are known to introduce less than 1% of new vulnerabilities over time. And finally, the process is quite consistent. So there are many indicators that can lead to the assumption that there is no decreasing effort over time. But the effort issue is also linked to our looking at the bug bounty program that I'll talk about in a second. And well, this box here tells that we have reason to believe that many of the findings can be also extended to other Linux versions and even to vendor-specific software collections. In what we did, we tried to collect as much data as possible. The Debian security advisories, which are the names for patches to stable. They also have a long-term support for which they have an announcement channel. One advantage is also that the CVE information is quite elaborate and available from the National Vulnerability Database that NIST holds. And we can also relate the data to a certain extent to bounty reports from the HackerOne platform. So overall, we got more than 10,000 unique vulnerabilities in our data set, affecting around 1,200 packages. And the time span of our data is more than 18 years, which gives us a very good look at the process. We made all this available via GitHub as the so-called Debian vulnerability analysis framework, together with the tools and plots and tests and also plotting tools so that others can benefit from this work. We tested 3 hypotheses. Obviously, we wanted to know about the vulnerability rate, and the hypothesis was that the vulnerability rate would show some signs of maturity. So for instance, after a first peak, it would decline over time. Especially, we wanted to distinguish different kinds of bugs. It would be a sign of maturity, especially if fewer severe bugs were found over time. And finally, of course, the effort that is put into finding vulnerabilities corresponds quite a bit to the prices for finding vulnerabilities. So if we saw vulnerability prices rising later in the lifetime of a package, that would be an indicator that it has become more difficult to find vulnerabilities. Okay, now what are the results? They're quite astonishing, and they kind of corroborate the early finding that there is no such decline. In fact, we saw an increasing trend over 5 years, and you see here the orange bars that indicate the time frame when the next release of Debian was put into stable. So the blue is for Debian version 7, and it continues after Debian 8 was introduced. And the dark red is when it gets into the long-term release, still with a very subtle and intensive bug finding process, as I had explained. So we can see that you know, there are many fluctuations, but in general, the trend is definitely increasing. And the same applies to individual packages. I don't have to go into detail. One important or interesting thing here is that we often see a spike after the release of the next version of a package. This is because many code pieces that are in the new version are also in the old one. And so new detected bugs when hackers turn to a new version also apply to the old version. Now, one interesting thing I said regarding hypothesis 2, that the severity of bugs could decrease. If you look at this figure, then you might get this impression, because the darker reddish color talks about the percentage of severe bugs found, and you see the lighter orange bar to increase over time, so that more and more medium severity bugs are found. But this is only the ratio. If you now look at the absolute numbers again, then finding high severity bugs is still increasing. So the figure before comes from the fact that the number of medium severity bugs found is even increasing faster. And we found no signs that you know, the bug bounty programs would pay higher prices over time, increasing the effort. And I don't have time to go into these details more, but obviously there is no indication for increasing effort over time to find vulnerabilities, which you find here in this yellow. So I conclude that there's no strong evidence in favor of software maturity for packages over the lifetime of stable releases. And so the vulnerability hunting seems to have the same effect as scraping the tip of an iceberg. There's a lot of effort, but there's no apparent progress. It seems like we're just really, take off bugs, but the iceberg is so huge that there's no decrease in the rate. Okay, and the other the light gray finding is a side effect. That's just for your records, and we found no relation to the bug bounty programs. So insights: long-term support for critical distribution is advisable, but by far not enough. We might have some effect from improved procedures and tools, but definitely not enough to decrease that rate. So further improvement is needed. Bug bounty programs could have another effect if they became more attractive. And of course, we are now in search of other and better security metrics, because for us, the result is rather, how should I say, it's rather frustrating, if you wish, to a certain extent. And the cross-mission inside, we need more effective hardware and software mitigation measures. If bugs are not depleted, we have to invest more in mitigating their impact. And now we are up to and already deeply into looking at further measures that we can use for our project. And in the midterm, of course, we have the important question of which of these measures are really promising with request to comparing software products.